since she's so close to the near post and she's so deep on her line on the angle, it's just really hard for her to do two of our principles that are super important, is defending the goal frame and the goal area. And just once the ball gets slipped across, she just doesn't really have a chance. So if she just adjusted her positioning and maybe had her hips facing the ball a little bit more and was a little bit more, I guess, centrally a tad bit, it would be easier for her to maybe, one, impact the ball that's played across, or two, be preventative when the shot was coming off of like a spread. That's what my choice would have been. I would have tried to spread into the 6-yard box as the ball got played across to try to be preventative on the shot coming on the goal frame.
Yeah, that's brilliant. And I think it's just worth noting, and you said this, right? Like, it's one of the first things I wrote down when you started talking was, this is difficult. The half space just creates so much chaos and so much need to be decisive for defenders and for the goalkeeper. So that's why teams want to get in there. There's so many things you could do from the half space, whether it be take it to the end line and cut it back, whether it be drive in for a 1v1, whether it be create a combination play, whether it be cut it back into your inside foot and have a shot, whether it be kind of like clipped or smaller cross in, depending on where you are inside the half space. There's just so much variation of what could occur. And I think that's why sometimes positioning does get difficult. She has the right idea, drop back, defend that the goal, right? Wait to maybe defend the space. But from here, it's almost like, all right, I'm only worried about protecting one thing. Takes us back to your intended out, or your first point of like, you want to try to impact or affect multiple outcomes. And in this case, you really have nothing but protecting that near post.
And it kind of goes back to, I guess, another point. It wasn't like a key point, but as the ball gets played through, because this was the original ball was a pretty like longer pass through to like break the back line. And if you scan a little bit earlier, like out of possession, and recognize like where runners are, sometimes it makes your job easier.
Yep.
And as the ball gets played from the deeper area at the start of the clip, you could kind of tell pretty early that LA's only going to be able to get one attacker in the box, and she's making a central run. So my first idea is like, all right, if my positioning's good and I can't impact it, I kind of have an idea already in my head where the shot's going to come from. Maybe not exact, but I know she's not the back post. I know she's not making a near post run. I know it's going to come somewhere in the central area of the goal.
I know she has a defender putting on pressure here.
Yeah, 100%. And it, depending on the line of this pass, which was pretty threatening, I mean, it's right outside the 6-yard box, it kind of helps me understand where I could take my line to the ball to be preventative and impact it, whether if it's a spread or a smother, whatever you would like to choose there.
Right. And it gives you the ability to do that if you adjust your positioning, because right now, the way she sets herself, it would be really hard to get into her spread or smother and be preventative there. However, if her hips were angled, that's a different story. And we're talking about being able to kind of like grab that ground and push into that preventative measure as well.
100%.
All right, Kieran. Looks like we're switching over to the men's game on this one.
Yeah, I had to get a Man City clip in here, but
makes sense. It's
actually not Man City's goalkeeper. It's Allison. So it kind of it's the opposite of what we were kind of just talking about 2 clips ago. Is it's a great ball from De Bruyne. He plays it into the half space, but Allison recognizes pretty early that when he leaves the most dangerous area of the goal, he can prevent this ball. So it was a great decision, and there wasn't much risk here because he had a recovering defender. This was really the only dangerous player in the box as of right now. He has another center back covering the other run. And since he was so decisive and he took off early in his spread, it was pretty easy for him to prevent. And then the cross comes in. I'm not sure what happens after this. I clipped it, but
I think it's another good fill into one of your points of like, all right, can I save this on the near post? And I did, and I used my preventative measures to do it. And then it comes back out here, and he's in a position where he's being patient. He's got defenders back, and he's ready to impact what he maybe potentially can. He gets back on that near post, gets himself squared up, and then comes in. So
even there, if you go back, it's a little bit tricky if the people that are watching, this is something that I've tried to really think about, like when I'm coaching, is especially since he has 2 defenders there, this might be a case where my hips are a little bit turned and I'm not as squared off. It's definitely up for debate, but I just feel like he has really good coverage from his defenders on a ball that's played on the floor across, especially really close to the 6-yard box. But what I would really be worried about if I scanned and knew there was a player behind me, or even Jack Grealish with his arm up, I would be really worried about this ball that's lifted in the air.
Yeah.
So maybe my first thought would be, I don't know if this is going to come on the floor or it's going to come in the air. But when you're in the run of play like this after he already made a save, it's really difficult to
100%.
to think that way and make these quick adjustments.
Yeah, one thing that I've been talking a lot about when it comes to half space and like as it transitions into end line service, goalkeepers have a lot of questions of like, when do I take my positioning from like, maybe being on the angle here or being a little bit more set into my goal to being butt level with this post and squared up. And for me, the easiest way to say it, and I don't think it's like super concrete and like black and white. There's not many things in goalkeeping that are, but as you get closer down this line, that's when I'm starting to come closer to my post. If you could pass it in or if someone could tap it in there, I want to be protecting that area. So for me, if I was to draw an arrow from here with the tip here, I would say as it draws down that line, that's when I'm getting closer. Obviously, maybe like if there's no pressure here, that's when I decide, okay, how close are you getting? Can I be preventive? Kind of like Allison did in the first clips.
Yeah, and it's tough. Like I feel like when I look at this clip, especially the second part, which wasn't really my main goal of like showing it, but I would try to recognize like who is the most dangerous attacker right now.
Right.
And who would be the biggest threat. And like since there's 5 Liverpool players in the front half of this 18-yard box, and there's no one really like, if there was a City player like in the middle of these 4 defenders, then I'd be really worried about it. But if De Bruyne cuts it back to Mahrez, who's at the top of the box, he has some coverage from Fabinho there who can maybe step and block the shot. But it's just would be really concerned about the 2 runners at the back post, just because the right side center back, I guess, doesn't really know he's there. The outside back's not sure if he should cover either which run. It gets difficult. It's definitely like up for debate, and I guess it also maybe relates back to what your goalkeeper's strengths are and what they feel comfortable with.
Absolutely. It also goes back to like why it's so important for goalkeepers to also understand the roles and responsibilities of their teammates, right? Like this is a situation that we faced a lot this fall in particular, where there'd be this back post runner and our weak side center back and weak side outside back were always like, do I call the midfielder back? But we shouldn't need to call our midfielder back. And this is why it's important to know your tactical and like formation approach as well, because you need to know who's picking these up. Because look at him right here. He's confused. Who should I go to? Who's more dangerous, right? And I mean, you don't want either of these players open. We both know. Yeah. So that just kind of goes in and could be a sidebar point of like, it's helpful to know the roles and responsibilities of your teammates so you can be directing information in these scenarios as well. All right, I think we're on our final clip, Kieran.
Yeah, last one. Oh, it's Mandy again.
Yeah, it is.
See, this is a great. I thought this was like one of the best clips I've seen of her that I've ended up finding or found on my computer and my phone. Is same idea. Like it's a really dangerous pass. It was actually a great pass from the player on Spirit, but it's kind of just inside the half space. So, like I guess the debate on the line of the wide area in the half space, but she recognizes really early that this player is super dangerous and it's really tough. Going to be really tough for me to react. You're going to assume that the attacker on Spirit's going to shoot it on one touch. So she just comes out and makes herself super big and spreads early and ended up making a really, really good save. But this one I liked because it wasn't as like deep towards the end line. It was kind of like an earlier ball. And I mean, Mandy's in really good position here. She's got pressure on the ball. The forward on Spirit doesn't really look like she's going to shoot the ball. So she's just trying to look and pick up runners. And you can see, again, she's pointing. She does a really good job of this in a lot of the matches and clips I've seen of her, is recognizing where the danger is before the ball is played in. And right when she sees it slipped, she makes a really quick decision because she knows that they're kind of like in a 2v1 essentially. Like Utah's only got one player there that can maybe block the pass from being played through besides pressure on the ball. And immediately as it gets played through, she's super preventative. And it just goes back to another point of like prevent when I can and react when I must.
I also love it too, because from here, her positioning is so great. And for me, positioning is one of the most important parts of half space, right? Like if
It's one of the hardest, to be fair. Like it
absolutely.
sounds super easy, but it's really difficult.
Because if she chooses, I think she hits that with her. Yeah, she hits that with her left foot, like a little like dink pass. I don't know what you call a stab.
Like outside the foot or something. But
if she chooses to cross this, Mandy's in such like that is ultimately what's so difficult. Besides the chaos, and the reason there is chaos from the half space is because could be a cutback, could be a cross, could be a slip ball for 1v1, could be a shot. So depending on where they are, where their runners are, and where the defensive pressure is, like we have to be mindful of our positioning. And just going back to one of your, I think it was point number 2 or point number 1, you have to be ready to impact multiple outcomes without giving up too much of one.
And I think like if you go back to when before the player on Spirit like is gonna shoot it or like pass it, she kind of knows. I'm assuming she like maybe someone watching is like, well, there's a lot of the goal that's open. But if the player on Spirit ends up pushing it on her right foot and then like the touch kind of looks threatening, like she would have adjusted her positioning accordingly.
Right.
But since there's pressure on the ball, she was taking a chance that her defender would be able to help her out or maybe push her wider before she could shoot it. If there was no pressure on the ball, maybe she'd be a little bit more inclined to defend the goal because the player's wide open and continue to dribble towards it. But since her defender does a good job of stepping out there and trying to just show her towards the outside, it was a little bit easier for her to adjust her positioning for more of the ball or cross that's played in rather than defending the goal.
Brilliant. I love it. I think those clips are excellent and just such a great representation of your 4 points. So before we close up today, can you just go... Welcome to the Keeper Institute podcast. My name is Tori Corsaro. I'm a strength and conditioning and goalkeeper coach here at the Keeper Institute and your host for today's show. The Keeper Institute is a unique goalkeeper training facility in New Jersey aimed at developing better goalkeepers and better people. On this podcast, we will be discussing all things goalkeeping, character development, and more. Welcome back to another episode of the Keeper Institute podcast. You know what's messed up? We have a brand new button from a cool listener of the podcast, and both of us left it at TKI.
We are filming from home today, which is a total bummer. I wish I would have planned a little bit better so I would have had that. But next week, we will make sure to incorporate that. That was so thoughtful and like really encouraging to us that like people are really listening to our podcast and like one, tune in every week to hear what we have to say, but two, just so thoughtful, like just that's just so kind and like so TKI parentish thing to do.
Yeah. And what an active listener. They know you've been talking about the button and that you want a button, so they got one.
I know. Thank you. I know. It was so super kind, super kind. And if anyone else has any feedback or anything that you've been listening to the podcast, we would love to know. You don't have to write a review. We're not trying to get you to, pump up our podcast. If you feel so inclined, that's great. But we also just want to hear people's experience and if it's meeting them where they're at or any ways that we can continue to be better.
For sure.
Which brings us to a topic that we're really excited about because we want to serve you through our podcast, but we also want to serve the people that get to train with us on a daily basis. And we kind of want to dispel 3 misconceptions about the Keeper Institute from a coaching, parent, and player perspective. So I'm excited to unravel some of these misconceptions with you, Tor, and kind of have a free space to articulate why we do what we do and how we do what we do, because ultimately we believe that it leads to accelerate it or maximizing our time with players.
Absolutely. So without further ado, we're going to get right into it. I think sometimes this is like things we joke about, and like there's a frequent like joke that I like to make when we're super busy about like, oh, what even happens over there, right? But I think that it's natural if you haven't maybe been to TKI and you just see our social media, like that's life, right? Like when you see snippets of social media, you create this perception of what might be happening. But I think that just like anything else, there's so much more that's underneath that maybe until you experience it, you don't necessarily know. So we're going to talk about 3 misconceptions that we've either been told or we've heard through the grapevine or we just people assume about us. So we're going to get right into number one, and it's that we are all fun. Okay? Yes, you're going to have a lot of fun. Yes, I firmly believe sport should be fun because, yeah, there's a seriousness to it. There's a hard work element, but we're playing soccer. It is a game, and it should have elements of fun. But we are not all fun, and it is serious work, and we do push our athletes to, challenge themselves while challenging ourselves to be better too.
Yeah, I think there's a clear distinction between fun and enjoyment. When I think about necessarily like fun, maybe I'm thinking about, going in the pool with my friends and horseplay and like playing Marco Polo or doing some kind of diving contest off the diving board. That is fun. And there are elements of our training that is fun. But there's a difference between, for me, a clear distinction between fun and enjoyment and fulfillment, right? So to me, what's fun about goalkeeper practice is challenge. I love to be challenged. I really like to be spurred toward greater learning or skill development or something that feels uncomfortable for me, because I know in that space, that's where I'm going to take the most ground in understanding myself or understanding the game. So I really, really like challenge. I also really like competing. There's just an element of me that is just a competitor. And whether I win or lose, I really find that enjoyable. And also, like as practitioners, as coaches, as teachers, we can use competition to steer attention to certain elements of the game, right? So if we, let's say, want to work on impacting the attacker in 1v1 scenarios, and we have players that continue to block and spread when maybe smother might be an option, we're going to have a competition where we say, all right, well, if you gain possession and distribute it to this target, you get 2 points, right? So not only is it competition, which fuels that, like, I'm going to, but I'm going to try my best. I'm going to push myself, but we're also rewarding and using consequences as feedback, which I think enhances our ability to learn and grow and take in the appropriate information to make those actions. I think that we have to be really intentional about fun and enjoyment and making those two potentially different, because everybody finds enjoyment in different elements of the game. And we want everyone's experience to be enjoyable, because if you're in this for the long term, it's every single day. You don't want to go somewhere where you dread it and you don't enjoy it. Like if you had a 9 to 5, perhaps, that you didn't really enjoy, you probably wouldn't be fueled with passion to go learn and develop in that space.
Right.
So we want players to come back. We want them to continue to enjoy themselves, because at the end of the day, like you said, this is a game, and we are hoping to reap the benefits not only of growing as a goalkeeper, but also as a person.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and it's not all like fun and games all the time. We don't just sit around and play like some of those games you see us start with for like a warm up, right? Or everything from top to bottom isn't a competition, but the session should have elements of that, right? And it's also about knowing your athlete and like what does that enjoyment look like to them, because your level of enjoyment is different maybe than what I find enjoyable, and kind of finding that balance and knowing and assessing each person that you work with or each group that you work with to kind of understand what they might need on any given day is part of what we do too.
Well, also, Tori, I just feel like our recipe for success of training is figuring out when to intervene as a coach, right?
Mm-hmm.
Making the session design the main stimulus for learning. But most importantly, everything is trumped by creating a psychologically safe environment. And we are really intentional about curating and designing the way we want people to feel within our context, right? We want people to feel safe. We want them to feel included. We want them to feel heard and seen. All of those kind of go into making something enjoyable. And ultimately, it's not our responsibility to make sure you enjoy it, but we want to create a space where people feel like they can explore solutions and challenge themselves and find the enjoyment that they seek out.
Right. Well, you said something in there that kind of perfectly brings us to point number 2. So I'm going to kind of slip into point number 2, which is that we don't coach. I think this one's a little bit funny because if we didn't coach, like I don't know that we'd still be in business. Or that people would want to come back, right? Like we would be essentially like the little gym, which is a great place for little kids to learn, explore, and like play. But adults don't go to the little gym to like get stronger and fitter, right? Like, I don't know. People keep coming back and we are in business. So we do coach. So why don't you go ahead and maybe dispel this myth a little?
Yeah, I think the traditional way of coaching is just the coach telling people what to do, right? The coach saying, Tori, you need to do this and you need to do that, and that's wrong, and you should do this and you have to do this and you should never do that, right? And I think in our head, like that's just the way that we were raised. Like, that's what coaches do is they holler, they tell, they instruct, and they just have all the keys and all the answers to the problems, right? And you should listen to them, and everything they say is gospel. I like legitimately, I didn't realize that not everything my coaches told me was gospel truth until I was a professional athlete and was like, whoa, I have my own brain and I can use my own brain, right? So for us, like I said earlier, our recipe for success, and most important, is creating the environment. And second most important is making sure that we make the session design the main stimulus for learning, right? So I believe that consequences are the feedback, right? Consequences are feedback. Consequences don't always have to be good. They don't always have to be bad. They're just there. I did this, and so this happens. If I have a consequence to an action, it immediately gives me feedback in which I, as the coach, don't have to say, you should have held that. You have to hold everything, right? There's a player there, right? We design our sessions. So there's a player there that if you give up a poor rebound, they will score. And that immediately gives you feedback. That immediately makes you respond and think like, oh, I just got scored on because I tried to catch that and I dropped it right in front of the attacker. Whereas maybe I didn't feel as comfortable, so I should have pushed it into a safer area of the pitch. I don't have to say that. One, that takes up way too much time, right? We have 60 minutes, 90 minutes to work with an athlete. I'm spending 1 minute telling them that they should catch everything because that's the right way to do everything. Well, no, I'm just going to put an attacker there and see if the goalkeeper adapts and responds, because we know that will lead to much longer term development rather than just an immediate quick fix, right? So yes, we are potentially more quiet in sessions and less give less instruction, because we design our sessions to bring attention to the important things and allow goalkeepers to explore solutions for themselves to find out what's working or what's not necessarily working. Now, we can 100% change the session design, change the constraint within the exercise to either challenge the goalkeeper more or rein it back because they need a little bit more support, right? So let's say the goalkeeper's working in possession, they need a bit more support on solving pressure. Okay, maybe we're putting pressure on from, their left-hand side, so the space is on the right-hand side, but the goalkeeper continues to take that touch underneath of their body, right? We can ask questions to lead them like, hey, how can you gain more time away from pressure, right? They're still not responding. Maybe I can put a free space on the field to say, when you touch over here, this is a free space and the opponent can't put pressure on you. And then they start to recognize, oh, I need to take a bigger touch away from pressure, right? And that leads to more long-term development. There's so many benefits, and like I could be on my high horse about this for hours and hours, but there's so many benefits because we don't always know what's the best movement solution for each goalkeeper, right? And if we tell them you have to do this, what if there's a better way for them? What if they haven't explored that there is a different way for them specifically because I continue to tell them you have to kick save here? Well, what if that's not the best and most effective way for them, right? And if I'm telling them they have to do something, or, in this area, you have to kick save, I could be taking away their ability to sweep. I could be taking away that movement solution that they found. Actually, I really like that a little bit better in this scenario. It feels more comfortable and I feel more effective. So yes, for us, it could potentially look like we don't coach because we're not explicitly saying the feedback every time. But in our heads, we're observing, which coaches probably could do a lot better if they observed more and talk less. We're observing and we're manipulating the environment based on our observations to help the goalkeepers find solutions within the context of the game.
Yeah, so I just you're provoking a lot of thoughts in my head on this conversation, and I think it could branch off in a lot of different directions, but I'm going to just give a little tidbit that I think might in particular be very helpful for the parent or the coach potentially perspective that might be listening with us. And I can think about a shift in TKI. So I've now been at TKI for I think almost 8 years, and there's been a lot of shifts in the way we do things, both from our coaching perspective, but just even just the way we educated ourselves on what might be working best for our players. And I can think about a very clear shift from, maybe coaching in the way we do now, which is very constraints-led approach and talking about being more of an observer and setting those constraints to give consequences. That way we're not, constantly giving answers in a goalkeeper's ear to help them make a choice. It's more like them discovering, what you were just talking about. And I remember at first how uncomfortable it was for me to say less. Mm-hmm. And then I remember also being is the parent watching and being did Tori just want to take today off and not say anything? What's happening? And now I don't have those concerns at all, because you can very much see the goalkeepers responding in their own way. And sometimes it's through failure of just continuously taking a touch into me, right? And then sometimes it's with problem solving. And no matter which way it goes, at the water break, we're having conversations, or in a moment where we need to stop, we're having conversations, and the kid's able to give me an answer. Mm-hmm. Right or wrong, they're able to give me an answer, and we're having dialogue and feedback. And I no longer worry oh, what does this person think? And some of that my own stuff, right, of caring about that outside perspective. But it's also it is uncomfortable to coach this way. So I understand why sometimes maybe the perspective is we, quote unquote, don't coach.
Right.
Because it's a little less comfortable than, one, what we're used to, and two, what we feel maybe someone is paying us to do.
Well, I think this taps into, and this is a podcast that we talked about earlier today that we're going to record next week, but this kind of taps into what I believe that people would say is wrong with the modern day American goalkeepers, is that they don't understand the game, they can't solve pressure, and they're not confident. And I think our philosophy and the way that we train, the way we practice, kind of enhances all of those things, right? It enhances game understanding, because now I know what I'm scanning for, and that will dictate what my first touch is, right? Now I understand, where's the pressure coming from? Oh, I know I can solve it by using mat and moving and asking or touching into space, right? Or I feel really confident because I just solved that problem. It felt like by myself. Tori said to me, all right, the principle is find space. And then the goalkeeper takes a touch back against the grain and uses the momentum of the attacker against him. And they're like, oh my gosh, I didn't even know I could do that. Right. Yeah. And they feel way more confident. And they have this sense of self-efficacy, which is what Chris talks a lot about. And that spurs them on to be like, wow, what else can I do? What else can I accomplish? I'm really strong. I'm really adaptable. What else? What more can I take in this space? Is I understand where the pressure is coming from and where the space is, and I understand how to solve that. And so it enhances everything that coaches say is wrong with the current American goalkeepers. And by the way, we're going to dig into that a little bit more. It's our fault as coaches that we have produced these types of goalkeepers, right? Who, quote, don't really know tactics, don't communicate, aren't confident, can't solve pressure in possession. We have created, as coaching society, we have created that. And I really believe that the way that we're coaching helps to take space in those areas so that we can have adaptable, flexible, efficient, effective, consistent problem solvers. I'm pumped. I'm pumped to do that podcast. Yeah.
I have nothing to say because I like it. I like it a lot. All right, Jill. Well, let's get to our last point. And okay, like if you believe this, you might be kind of accurate. I'm just going to be honest. But it's not that I don't believe in technique. It's that I believe in principles.
Yeah.
So the last myth that we are going to dispel / kind of maybe validate is that we don't believe in technique. And side note, I'm realizing I have no clue how to spell technique because you're the second person in 2 days who had to correct me on that.
All good.
But that's good. That's good. I won't tell you guys how I spell it. So we don't believe in technique. And you know what? You're kind of right, but you're also not. So when I say technique, and I'll let you give your opinion, but I would say that I don't care so much about your technique. I care about the principles of the way things are happening. And yes, is there a general way that might be best? Sure. However, we like to give outlines, guidelines, principles to help our goalkeepers be that list that Jill just gave, effective problem solvers and movers. So the way that things work for Jill aren't going to be the way they work for me because, as you know, tall, small, right? And then we have other physical attributes and, like character traits that make certain things work better for her than me. So she's super aggressive and brave in the air. I'm not. I'm better at reacting. So there's just certain things that have to come down to principle to make us be effective goalkeepers. So do I believe that I need a goalkeeper to be able to consistently shuffle through or around cones and be able to catch a volley? No, I don't. I don't believe that that's the best way to do it. But I do think that I want to be able to make a goalkeeper efficiently move across into positioning and feel comfortable to get into a set shape to be able to make a final action, whether it be absorb pace and catch or whether it be leave their feet and dive to keep the ball out of the back of the net.
Yeah, I mean, I think the misconception here is that technique is skill, and technique is not skill. Technique is an action, and skill is choosing the appropriate action in the appropriate circumstance effectively. So I argue that we want to create skilled goalkeepers who can make decisions on what technique to use and execute that rather than just technique. And something that I know about technique is that you can learn a technique in isolation. And if you learn a technique in isolation, you then have to relearn it back into the context of the situation. So you're kind of wasting time if you just do technique. And I think that there's just been this movement from us to use ecological dynamics and the constraints-led approach a bit more. So basically, performance hinges upon the relationship between the individual and the environment. So the individual, those are constraints that you were just talking about, size, speed, strengths, all those things are interacting with whatever's in the environment to then perceive that information and make a decision. And that will ultimately lead to your performance. But let's just take this for an example. I think that scanning is one of the most underrated skills of a goalkeeper, right? And my 85-year-old grandmother can turn her head side to side. That would be the technique. She can do this. That's the technique of scanning, right? But the skill of scanning is knowing when to turn your head. Because if you turn your head like this while the ball is potentially being crossed, you're in trouble, right? Or if you turn your head like this when the opponent is within inside shooting distance and has the ball on their foot, obviously that's going to be to your detriment. But also just thinking about what are you scanning for? That needs to be something that's within your practice design. If I'm just working on the technique of scanning my head, I'm then going to have to learn when to do that and also assess what am I looking for. That's the skill, right? So I think it's funny because I think we can all resonate with we all can technically scan. I can turn my head and I can see stuff. But if I don't know when to do it and what to look for, it's not really going to be that helpful within the context of a football game, right? So I know that's a silly kind of analogy, but I also think that it's really relevant because how many times do you see coaches say they're working on scanning and hold up a colored dot and say, all right, you see this yellow dot? Pass it to the person that's wearing the yellow penny, which is just when does that happen in the game? How is that going to help me translate what I'm learning in training to a game? It feels like two separate things. I'm training to be good at your little, circus games, or I'm training to be better in a game. It just feels like completely different, right? Like you can tell me, okay, look over your shoulder, look for the color, and then pass to the associated. Or we can just do, here's the ball, here's pressure, look for where pressure and space is and play it to the available option. It's just, it's so simple. And you don't need multiple people. I just was getting into an argument with someone on Instagram about this today. You could do a lot with a whole little, you and one other person, right? You don't need to hold cones and hold one up and tell them to pass it to some corresponding mini goal. You literally can pass, press, and give the opportunity for the goalkeeper to read where the space is, how to get into that space, utilizing different constraints to get them to solve pressure in different ways, and then execute their pass to potentially whatever is open, right? So technique by itself is useless. We want skill. We want effective problem solvers. And to me is, yes, there's sometimes where there's an impingement with a goalkeeper that's like, maybe they can't dive because their set shape is a little bit off. Well, great. Let's learn that in the context. Let's create some kind of constraint or destabilize their ineffective movements and then figure out a way to allow them to explore a different solution, right? And again, that goes back to all the benefits that we were just talking about in our second point of like understanding the game better, helping to create more confidence, and just being able to solve like so many different solutions rather than just do the solution over and over and over.
Yep. Love. Mic drop. That's our three. That's our three.
Yeah.
These are three things that like we frequently hear about TKI, or like we hear through the grapevine, is the best way to say it. And while from the surface level that might be what it looks like, once you have a conversation or you experience or you maybe even like come and watch, observe, I think you hopefully quickly see that like what we're saying is a dispel of that myth. It is what we're trying to do, because at the end of the day, like we want to create great goalkeepers, but even better people. And that's our mission. That's our ground that we stand on. And it's what we base what we do off of. And I think that when it comes down to it, we want these goalkeepers to be efficient, effective problem solvers, and we want them to be autonomous and be able to do that with or without us. And we want them to feel supported, and we want them to feel like, they're capable of becoming their best self.
Yeah, I think Tori, a couple weeks ago, me and Maria were talking about, TKI and how we are kind of the disruptor in the industry. And you guys were like, yeah, people think we're hocus pocus. And I was like, what? People think we're hocus pocus? Like, what? I don't understand that. And, I do think that we are doing things in a non-traditional way in a very traditional industry. But I think what makes us special is that our approach is based in science and proven methods to develop skills within the context of the game. And I also think it's really enjoyable, but it's really hard. It's really hard for us, and it's really hard for the athletes that we get to work with, right? Because, a lot of goalkeepers will just get sweat equity and they'll go out and they'll do cones and move over cones and hit a volley or catch a volley or whatever. And they're 10 out of 10. And we don't ever allow anyone to be 10 out of 10 within our sessions. Because if you're 10 out of 10 in your sessions, you're not getting any better. You're not growing. You're not stretching. And so we have done a lot of studying. We are doing a lot of preparation for every single session, because we are thinking about, how can I nudge this goalkeeper to find different solution than maybe the ineffective one that they're doing right now? And how can I do that without my words? How can I allow them to explore and be super intentional about challenging them, but equally supporting them to be their best? And, I think over time, TKI has been existing for like the last 12 years. And I think we've been on this constant evolution of understanding teaching, understanding, how to design our sessions to maximize the time that we get with goalkeepers. And in the last, like, I would say maybe 4 to 5 years is when we've seen the most growth in goalkeepers. And it's crazy. It's so amazing to see. Like, we've got goalkeepers in every NWSL club. Some of our interns, I think we have 6 interns in NWSL clubs at this point. And it's just been quite remarkable to see how people have soaked up this way of learning and made it their own. And it feels really good. Like, it feels really fulfilling to be part of these goalkeepers' journeys. And to, we got an email a couple weeks ago from a player that we hadn't seen in like 5-6 years. And she was like, thank you so much for creating this space that allowed me to define and refine my character, because I used it when I went to college and tried out for the team that I should have never been on. I walked on and I tried out, and it's helped me pursue my passions in photography and running after I was done playing. And it feels really fulfilling. It's a lot of hard work, and it's really, really hard to coach this way, but it's really fulfilling for everybody, I think, involved. And so if you're questioning, you want to know more about our philosophy and the way that we coach, we're actually starting a TKI coaching college for anybody who's like just coming out of college and wants to be a career coach and wants to make that transition. It'd be a paid position. And if you guys are interested in more, listen to next week's podcast, because we're going to do a full chat about that, because we want to not only help goalkeepers grow, but we want to help coaches grow as well.
Boom. Love it. Thank you guys for joining us. As always, thank you for listening. It means the world to us to know that people are out here listening to us talk about what we're passionate about, and getting to do it together, because we love goalkeeping, we love each other, and we obviously love TKI. Per usual, if you have questions, if you have comments, if you have feedback, we would love to hear it. You can reach out to us directly at the Keeper Institute's Instagram or through our email, which you can get right off the site. Both of us are pretty darn good at responding most of the time. Jill's
Sure.
lies say otherwise, but we are good. Okay,
I'll get it back in 7 business days.
yeah, 7 to 10 business days.
7 to 10, without a doubt.
But as always, thank you guys, and we'll catch you later.
Catch you later.